Subjective and objective consciousness. Gurdjieff used the expressions objective and subjective in a particular sense, taking as a basis the divisions of objective and subjective states of consciousness. All of our ordinary knowledge, based upon ordinary methods of observation and verification of observations, all scientific theories deduced from the observation of facts, accessible to us in subjective states of consciousness, he called subjective. Knowledge based upon ancient methods and principles of observation, knowledge of things in themselves, knowledge accompanying an objective state of consciousness, knowledge of the all, was for him objective knowledge. One of the central ideas of objective knowledge is the idea of the unity in everything, of unity in diversity. From ancient times, people who have understood the content and the meaning of this idea, and have seen in it the basis of objective knowledge, have endeavored to find a way of transmitting the idea in a form comprehensible to others. The successive transmission of the ideas of objective knowledge has always been a part of the task of those possessing this knowledge. In such cases, the idea of the unity of everything, as the fundamental and central idea of that knowledge, had to be transmitted first, and transmitted with adequate completeness and exactitude. To do this, the idea had to be put into such forms as would ensure its proper perception by others, avoiding in its transmission the possibility of distortion or corruption. For this purpose, the people to whom the idea was being transmitted were first required to undergo some form of preparation or initiation. Then the idea itself was put either into a logical form, as for instance in philosophical systems, that endeavored to give a definition of the fundamental principle from which everything else was derived, or into religious teachings that endeavored to create an element of faith, and to evoke a wave of emotion, carrying people up to a level of objective consciousness. The attempts of both the one and the other, sometimes more and sometimes less successful, run throughout the history of mankind, from the most ancient times to the present. They have taken the form of religious and philosophical creeds that have remained like monuments on the path of those attempts to unite the thoughts of mankind with esoteric thought. Objective knowledge, however, the idea of unity included, belongs to objective consciousness. The forms that express this knowledge, when perceived by subjective consciousness, are inevitably distorted, and instead of truth they create more and more delusion. With objective consciousness it is possible to see and to feel the unity of everything. However, for subjective consciousness, the world is split into millions upon millions of separate and unconnected phenomena. Attempts to connect these phenomena into some sort of system, in a scientific or philosophical way, lead to nothing, because men cannot reconstruct the idea of the whole, starting from separate facts. They cannot divine the principles of the division of the whole, without knowing the laws upon which this division is based. Nonetheless, the idea of the unity of everything exists also in intellectual thought, but in its exact relation to diversity it can never be clearly expressed, in words or in logical form. There remains always the insurmountable difficulty of language. A language that has been constructed through expressing impressions of plurality and diversity in subjective states of consciousness, can never transmit with sufficient completeness and clarity the idea of unity that is intelligible and obvious for an objective state of consciousness. Realizing the imperfection and weakness of ordinary language, the people who possessed objective knowledge tried to express the idea of unity in myths, in symbols, and in particular through verbal formulas. These have been transmitted without alteration, have carried on the idea from one school to another, often from one epoch to another, throughout history. It has already been noted that our higher psychic centers work in man's higher state of consciousness, the higher emotional and the higher mental or intellectual. The aim of myths and symbols was thus to reach man's higher centers, and to transmit to him ideas inaccessible to the intellect. To transmit them in such forms as would exclude the possibility of false interpretation. Myths were destined for the higher emotional center, and symbols for the higher intellectual center. By virtue of this, all attempts to understand or explain myths and symbols with the mind, or the formulas and expressions that give a summary of their content, are doomed beforehand to failure. It is always possible to understand anything, but only with the appropriate center. The preparation for receiving ideas belonging to objective knowledge has to proceed by way of the higher centers, without introducing elements foreign to them. The symbols that were used to transmit ideas belonging to objective knowledge included diagrams of the fundamental laws of the universe, and they not only transmitted the knowledge itself, but showed also the way to it. The study of symbols, their construction and meaning, formed a very important part of the preparation for receiving objective knowledge, and it was in itself a test, because a literal or formal understanding of symbols at once made it impossible to receive any further knowledge. Symbols were divided into the fundamental and the subordinate. The first included the principles of separate domains of knowledge, the second expressed the essential nature of phenomena in their relation to unity. Among the formulas giving a summary of the content of many symbols, there was one that had a particular significance, namely the formula, as above, so below, from the emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus. This formula stated that all the laws of the cosmos could be found in an atom or particle, in any other phenomena that exist, as something completed, in accordance with certain laws. This same meaning was contained in an analogy drawn between the microcosm, man, and the macrocosm, the universe. The fundamental laws of triads and octaves penetrate everything, and should be studied simultaneously, both in the world and in man. However, in relation to ourselves, we are closer and a more accessible object of study and knowledge than the world of phenomena outside of us. Therefore, in striving towards knowledge of the universe, we should begin with the study of ourselves, and with the realization of fundamental laws within us. From this point of view, another formula, know thyself, is full of particularly deep meaning, and is one of the symbols leading to the knowledge of truth. The study of the world, and the study of man will assist one another. In studying the world and its laws, we study ourselves, and in studying ourselves, we study the world. In this sense, every symbol teaches us something about ourselves. An understanding of symbols can be approached in the following way. In studying the world of phenomena, one must first of all see in everything the manifestation of two principles, one opposed to the other, that in conjunction or in opposition, give one result or another. That is, they reflect the essential nature of the principles that have created them. This manifestation of the great laws of duality and trinity, we see simultaneously in the cosmos and in ourselves. But in relation to the cosmos, we are merely a spectator, and furthermore one who sees only the surface of phenomena that are moving in various directions, though seeming to us to move only in one. However, in relation to ourselves, our understanding of the laws of duality and trinity can express themselves in practical form. Namely, having understood these laws in ourselves, we can, so to speak, confine the manifestation of the laws of duality and trinity to the permanent line of struggle within ourselves, on the path to self-knowledge. In this way we can introduce a line of will, first into the circle of time, then afterwards into the cycle of eternity. The accomplishment of which will create in us the great symbol known by the name of the Seal of Solomon. Transmission of the meaning of symbols to a person who has not reached an understanding of them within themselves is impossible. This sounds like a paradox, but the meaning of a symbol, and the disclosure of its essence can only be given to, and can only be understood by, one who already knows what this symbol is comprised of. Then for them, a symbol becomes a synthesis of their knowledge, and serves for the transmission and expression of that knowledge, just as it served the one who constructed it. The simplest symbols, or the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 that express them, possess a definite meaning, in relation to the inner development of man. They show different stages on the path of self-perfection, and of the growth of our being. Man in the normal state natural to him is taken as a duality. We consist entirely of dualities, or pairs of opposites. All of our sensations, impressions, feelings and thoughts are divided into positive and negative, useful and harmful, necessary and unnecessary, good and bad, pleasant or unpleasant, and so on. The work of centers proceeds under the sign of this division. Thoughts oppose feelings. Moving impulses oppose instinctive craving for stillness. This is the duality in which proceed all the perceptions, all the reactions, and the whole life of man. Anyone who observes themselves, however little, can see this duality. However, duality would seem to alternate, that which is victor today, is the vanquished tomorrow. Whatever guides us today, will become secondary and subordinate tomorrow, and everything is equally mechanical, equally independent of will, leading equally to no aim of any sort. The understanding of duality in oneself begins with a realization of mechanicalness, and the realization of the difference between what is mechanical and what is conscious. This understanding must be preceded by the destruction of self-deceit, where someone considers even their most mechanical actions to be volitional and conscious, or themselves to be single and whole. When self-deceit is destroyed, and we begin to see the difference between what is mechanical and conscious in ourselves, there then begins a struggle for the realization of consciousness in life, and for the subordination of the mechanical to the conscious. For this purpose, we begin with endeavors to establish a definite decision, coming from conscious motive, against mechanical process, proceeding according to the laws of duality. The creation of a permanent third principle is for us the transformation of the duality into the trinity. Strengthening the decision, and bringing it constantly and infallibly into all of those events, where formerly accidental neutralizing shocks used to act, and so yield accidental outcomes. Giving a permanent line of result through time, which is the transformation of the trinity into quaternity, or materiality. The next stage, the transformation of quaternity into quinternity, or spirituality, and the construction of the pentagram, has not one but many different meanings, even in relation to man. Of these is learned first of all the one relating to the work of centers. The development of the human machine, and the enrichment of our being, begins with a new and unaccustomed function of this machine. We know that everyone has 5 centers: the thinking, the emotional, the moving, the instinctive, the sexual. The predominant development of any one center at the expense of the others produces an extremely one-sided type of person, incapable of further development. However, if one brings the work of all 5 centers within them to harmonious accord, they then lock the pentagram within them, and become a finished type of the physically perfected being, Vitruvian man. The full and proper function of our 5 centers brings them into union with higher centers, which introduces the missing principle, and places us in direct and permanent contact with objective consciousness, and with objective knowledge. A person then becomes the 6-pointed star, the Star of David. By becoming locked within a circle of life, independent and complete in itself, they become isolated from foreign influence, or accidental shocks. They embody in themselves the seal of Solomon. In the present instance, a series of the symbols 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 are interpreted as being applicable to one process. However, even this interpretation is incomplete, because a symbol can never be fully interpreted. It can only be experienced, it should only ever be felt, in the same way, for example, that the idea of self-knowledge must be experienced, and cannot be interpreted. This process of the harmonious development of man can also be examined from the point of view of the law of octaves. The law of octaves gives another system of symbols. In the sense of the law of octaves, every completed process is a transition of the note do, through a series of successive tones to the do of the next octave. The 7 fundamental tones of the octave express the law of 7. The addition to it of the do of the next octave, which is to say, the crowning of the process, gives the 8th step. The 7 fundamental tones together with the 2 intervals and additional shocks, give 9 steps. By incorporating in it the do of the next octave, we have 10 steps, 10 dimensions. The last, the 10th step is the end of the preceding, and the beginning of the next cycle. The Mahavantara, or the cycle of Manu. In this way the law of octaves, and the process of development it expresses, include the numbers 1 to 10. From 1 dimension to 10 dimensions. At this point we come to what may be termed the symbolism of numbers. The symbolism of numbers cannot be understood without the law of octaves, or rather without a clear concept of how octaves are expressed in the decimal system, and vice versa. In Western systems of occultism, there is a method known by the name of theosophical addition, which is the definition of numbers consisting of 2 or more digits, by the sum of those digits. To people who do not understand the symbolism of numbers, this method of synthesizing numbers seems to be absolutely arbitrary, and to lead nowhere. However, for someone who understands the unity of everything existing, and who possesses the key to this unity, the method of theosophical addition has a profound meaning. For it resolves all diversity into the fundamental laws that govern it, which can be expressed in the numbers 1 to 10. In symbology, as represented, numbers are connected with definite geometric figures, and so are mutually complementary, one to another. In the Kabbalah, a symbology of letters is also used, and in combination with the symbology of letters, a symbology of words. A combination of the 4 methods of symbolism by numbers, geometrical figures, letters and words gives a rather complicated, but more perfected method. Then there exists also a symbology of magic, a symbology of alchemy, and a symbology of astrology, as well as the symbols of the tarot, which unites them into one whole. Each of these systems can serve as a means for transmitting the idea of unity. In the hands of the incompetent and ignorant, however filled with good intentions, the same symbol can become an instrument of delusion. The reason for this consists of the fact that a symbol can never be taken in a final and definite meaning. For every symbol there are 7 layers or 7 levels, 7 dimensions, 7 planes of reality. In expressing the laws of the unity of endless diversity, a symbol itself possesses an endless number of aspects from which it can be examined, and it demands from anyone approaching it the ability to see simultaneously from different points of view. Symbols that are transposed into the words of ordinary language become rigid in them, they grow dim and very easily degenerate into their own opposites, confining the meaning within narrow, dogmatic frames without giving it even the very relative freedom of logical examination. The cause of this lies in the literal understanding of symbols, in attributing to a symbol a single meaning. An outer covering of lies again veils the truth, and to discover it requires immense effort of negation, in which the idea of the symbol itself is obscured. The delusions arising from symbols of religion are well documented, of alchemy and in particular of magic or occultism, from those who have taken them too literally and only with singular meaning. At the same time, the right understanding of symbols cannot lead to dispute. It deepens knowledge, and it cannot remain theoretical, because it intensifies the striving towards real results, towards the union of knowledge and being, which is to great doing. True knowledge cannot be transmitted, however, by being expressed in symbols, it is covered by them as if by a veil. Although at the same time, for those that desire and who know how to look, this may well be transparent. In this sense, it is also possible to speak of the symbolism of speech, although everyone does not always understand this symbolism. To understand the inner meaning of what is being said is possible only on a certain level of development, when accompanied by corresponding effort, and the state of the listener's being. However, on hearing things that are new for us, instead of making effort to understand them, we begin to dispute, or to refute them, maintaining against them an opinion that we consider to be right, and which as a rule, has no relation whatsoever to them. In this way we lose all chance of acquiring anything new. To be able to understand speech when it becomes symbolical, it is essential to have learned before, and to know already, how to listen. Any attempt to understand literally, where speech deals with objective knowledge, with the union of diversity and unity, is doomed to failure beforehand, and leads in most cases to further delusion. It is necessary to dwell upon this point a little, because the intellectualism of contemporary education imbues people with a propensity, and a tendency to look for logical definitions, and for logical arguments against everything that they hear. Without noticing it, people unconsciously fetter themselves with their desire, as it were, for exactitude in those areas where exact definitions by their very nature imply inexactitude in meaning. Because of this tendency, referred to in our thinking, it often happens that knowledge concerning details, communicated to someone before they have acquired an understanding of the essential nature of a thing, makes it difficult for them to understand this essential nature. This does not mean that exact definitions do not exist on the path of true knowledge, on the contrary, only there do they truly exist. However, they differ very greatly from what we usually think them to be. If anyone supposes that they can go along the path of self-knowledge by an exact knowledge of all details, and if they expect to have such knowledge, without having first taken the trouble to assimilate the indications they have received, concerning their own work, then they must understand that they will not attain knowledge until they make the necessary effort, and only of themselves, only by their own effort, can they attain what they seek. There is no advocacy or transference available from anyone or anything, anywhere. No one can ever give us what we did not possess before. No one can do for us the work that we should do for ourselves. All that another can do, is to give us the motivation to work, and from this point of view symbolism, when properly perceived, plays the part of an impetus to that knowledge.